introduce Davide and we can move forward.
Perfect. The recording has started. So welcome everybody. I'm not sure who's got control now. Is it Davide or Mira? If you could just move the slide forward. So welcome to the network. It's our second official webinar. And again, as always, just remember the goal is to create a safe space. It's not about presenting research, but rather to share the insights of how we arrived. And there's Stan coming on cue. Thank you. It's how you arrived and what was important for you about this study. It is part of our network's goal of building capacity in practice and process studies. So we're not only interested in the topic or the theory, but also on your approach and learning from methodology. It's also about sparking new ideas. So the idea of sharing our research is hopefully it'll put some seeds down for further research, or if we have PhD candidates that are interested in that. The format, as always, I'll do the welcome and introduction. We please ask that you stay on after the session. We will just give you an update on where the network is at, what is happening, and some announcements about future events. But with that, I am going to hand over. Davide, thank you so much. Again, just a reminder, the idea is not to present the full research. So we've taken for granted that you've looked at the paper, and please feel free to ask questions. You can use the chat or you can raise your hand, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So with that, I'll hand over to Davide Nicolini, who will introduce the topic and introduce the paper for us today. Thank you so much, Davide, for your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I do have to apologize in advance. I am in the middle of a management meeting and I kicked out everybody else, told them to come back in 20 minutes. So we'll have to disappear. It's a shame because I read the paper with great interest. It's a lot of things going on through my mind. So what I'm going to do is, as I said, I'm not going to talk about the paper, but just 5 themes aside issues that the paper raises, and plus one. So I think for me, the theme you will see, the connecting themes of my questions for discussions, provocation, is that when we set up this forum, okay, in terms of decoloniality, the one thing we wanted to do is be authentic to the idea that when we have dialogue, both sides have to learn. So this is not colonizations of us teaching others. So very much in this spirit, my question was putting myself in the shoes of two of the 4 authors, I think, are Italian. So one is Giancarlo. Is that correct? You're Italian?
I am.
What is Carlo? Carlo is Italian, and also I think it's also Domenico is here.
Yes, Davide.
Salve, ciao.
Ciao.
So I try to use the paper sort of as a mirror. I think the paper says a lot of very interesting things about the community they study, and you can discuss this later. It says very interesting things about how to write paper for Northern or for Western journals. And I think both Carlo and Domenico will have stories to tell because there's clearly some elements of perfunctory use of methodology in this paper. So obviously you asked for the reviewer to put a few add-ons, which is at odd what you did. And you can tell the story, the back of the story. I am editor of this journal, so I know very well how things happen. So I'll leave that to you later on. I'm sure you would like to tell the back office of the story. I'm pretty sure that this beautiful paper has a story for being published. So you will ask to turn into something which is more conventional. The picture, the methodology, you can tell that story because it's there. We can see it in transparency. What I wanted to say, just what happens if you take this paper as a mirror for us? So this is what I, as a Northern scholar, learned from this case study. Okay. So
you have control of the slides, Davide.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is about witchcraft. Okay, so we don't have to, I don't have time to go, but witchcraft is one of the most contentious terms in Western anthropology. Many of you will be aware that the big debate in the Western philosophy traditions about rationality, irrationality, and relativism was around the word witchcraft. So we can just spend the rest of the year here discussing witchcraft. What I wanted to say is that the use of word witchcraft, for which in the North we don't have an alternative, we don't. In fact, it's problematic, or it's a reflection.
I've seen that.
Sorry?
Sorry, can you turn off your speakers?
It's me. Oh, sorry, it's not me. Okay, apologies. So the first thing is they read the paper is that in the North we don't have a word for a neutral word for describing this phenomenon. The problem is that when you use witchcraft, for a lot of us, we have right away a negative connotations entering in. So witchcraft is either irrational or negative or primitive, and which obviously is something that you cannot not think if you use the words. And so for me, that it would be interesting to think, so like so one of the things that the paper makes me think is that, sort of what happened if instead of calling this witchcraft, we would call it just using that, just an observations of the fact that in many cultures, supernatural things are agents, they're actants. These are things that are present in the world, normally present, okay, and they have agential power, so they make things happen or not happen. And so the things that would happen is that in the North, or part of the North, in the capitalized North, we have forgotten this. Okay, in many cultures, having supernatural agents among us, spirits or other type of forms, it's normal. It's a way of life. It's a way of connecting with nature, connecting with the world. So in many ways, the fact that we only have negative words with this, for me, this is my question, okay? Is this just a sign? And the surprise and some of the interest that this paper raises is just a reflection for us that we live in what Max Weber used to call a disenchanted world, a world when magic and spiritual has been forgotten, in which rationality has become the only game in town. And we have forgotten these things, we push them away. So in many ways, the very fact that we are surprised about what happens here is more reflection of what we think than what the Chihuahua people think. The second thought is about the concept of mystery. So just without giving you a lecture, but it's important to keep a distinction between these terms, okay? So mystery is different from uncertainty and ambiguity. And I like the fact that Carlo and Domenico are really careful in using ambiguity and mystery. So uncertainty is the lack of information. So something is uncertain if it's not, you cannot decide, and we need more information. Okay, uncertainty is different from ambiguity because ambiguity has an issues of interpretation. Two things can be interpreted differently. So ambiguity cannot be solved with more information. It has to be solved dialogically. We don't need to discuss how. Mystery is a step forward. So mystery is in existential conditions. Okay, so it's the being in an act of not knowing. So it's a negative concept. Okay, so it's an empty space where we don't know how to proceed. That's the deep mystery. So mystery is again a great powerful force because you cannot stay in mystery. Human brain, human mind, so despise mystery. Okay, so why is this important? Because again, okay, looking at how the Chihuahua people just deal with mystery. Okay, so just have mystery as part of their life is a reminder, okay, of the fact that as a Northerner, we have lost the capacity of dealing with mystery because the whole Northern project, which is called modernity, is predicated on the right of the kingdom of light. Everything has to be in the light. Everything has to be positive. Everything has to be manageable. The rest is just residual. Okay. So, and again, okay? And one of the ways in which this thing shows is historian Philippe Arié many years ago had a lovely idea that in the process of embracing light and transparency and explicability, we have pushed mystery out of to the point that mystery has become so problematic, okay, that we have expunged mystery from our life. And one of the signs is that in the northern part of the world, increasingly, the ultimate form of mystery, which is death, is become taboo. Philippe Arié said that together with the growth of the modern world, we have put death out of sight, is hidden, is almost something we're not supposed to talk. Not because it's death, but because it's created problems. Because in the world where everybody is knowable, everybody have enough for everything, death as an ultimate mystery, together with all the other mysteries, creates just a major issue. So again, okay, seeing how the mystery operates in this community for us, okay, is a reminder that as Northerner, as sort of the rich North, we have lost the capacity with the mystery and death. And for me, it was very interesting as a reminder, okay, that there are other ways of dealing with mystery, which is not just deleted from sight. I call it here active disregarding. So, so it's just the things that we hear in this paper, just a different strategy for making room for something that we are unable. So I'm saying is that this is pointing at deficiencies of the North, and that's why we're surprised. Two other very quick things. The paper is beautiful because it reminded us, okay, again, of one of the problems we have in the North is that very often, especially in the rich West, we have embraced a romanticized idea of communities. Communities is a thick concept because it describes something, but it's also evaluative. Okay, so it's called philosophy Anderson is called a thick concept. So you say you look in a community and then you say it's something that people should do. So if you're in a community, you're supposed to work for the better good. So that means the community doesn't only describe this way of life, it also prescribes certain things. And the paper reminded us that community, that this, when we talk about community, especially in the West, when people use this word, is just for calling this idealized, harmonious, cohesive, homogeneous group of all people the same, okay, which is a fiction, is an ideological fiction that is historically situated in the 1800s, but we carry with us. So community is one of these loaded things. People who live in real communities, I always say, I spent 3 years of my life in a small village in the Italian mountains. And I can tell you a story about community is that in a real community, conflict, inequality, negative emotions are normal because this is the way in which people live. So it was very interesting that the paper, okay, so shows how witchcraft talk is just, as I said, which is a way of talking where spiritual presences are part of the community. They have a place. In other cultures, they're materialized. Okay, people know that material objects are not the spirit, but it's a way to make them present in everyday life. So that this is one of the way of doing community. So one of the things you said is way of doing community. And finally, spirituality, okay? So spirituality is a big topic, okay? But again, asking myself, what this paper has to do about us and what, So spirituality is just try to connect your life, give meaning to your life, but connect with something which is bigger, which is longer in time, which is in universe, okay? Something which is not sort of in the short terms here and now, okay? So one thing that people tend to forget, again, so is that capitalism, accumulative capitalism, has a very strong form of spirituality built into it. So we tend to forget that, sort of capitalism is, according to some, famous Weber, but also other, okay, so is strongly impregnated with certain values. And when he goes around, he takes these values with it, okay, which derive from his spiritual foundations. So the spiritual foundations were the Protestant ethics that saw the entrepreneurs, okay, and something that had a mission, okay, they have to focus on the missions, but in which success is the way in which God signaled that certain people are chosen and certain people are not. So this is a form of spirituality, a form of ethos that is built on inequality between the chosen and the not chosen. And accumulations and becoming rich is not the things, is that some people are different than others necessarily, because that in this form of spirituality, okay, is a signal of the difference between the chosen and not chosen. So it's inequality built into this particular form of spirit. And again, okay, I was wondering if part of the paper on some of the story, and you can see this in some of the paper in which the managers refuse to engage with some of the witchcraft stuff, refuse to engage with the community things, because they sense that there is a clash or two from a spirituality. I just want to say that, so like a reminder that these things does not happen only in Africa, it's happened everywhere else. So in the Muslim country, okay, there is a clash between the Muslim religions and the principle and the financializations of capitalisms, because this is prohibited in the Muslim religions. We don't need to go. So this clash of the Western, one particular form of spirituality with others, is something which we have seen in multiple parts of the world. So this is the 5 topics. So as you can see, what I'm trying to say is that the paper, rather than us looking into a different culture, is at the same time us looking into our culture, our principles, our weaknesses, because most of the things I said is that disenchantment theory, the dictatorship of light, these are ways in which the northern world has become less resilient, has become more fragile, and so like there's a lot of observers that say that the epidemic of both extremism but also of mental illness in the north is because some of these things have made us less resilient. So we are seeing, so it makes us see our weaknesses in other people's practices. This is what I read in these things, and I left you for 5 very general topics, okay, that has to do with what the people from the north can learn by looking at these wonderful communities and be more realistic. That's me.
Thank you, David. Then I'll take back control now. And thank you for your introduction and highlighting questions to pose and lessons to learn from the paper. We'll leave you get on with your other tasks. And I have...
Before I go, I have time for 1 minute. If any questions? Yeah, the people from the meetings say yes.
Any comments? Yes.
I just wanted to briefly thank Davide, because I mean this is really helpful for us to even engage into this conversation, really with getting a fresh mind about this. And Davide, you are absolutely right. I think that we always used, Carlo and me, a lot of thinking about villages in the north of Italy, where Carlo is from, to think about how this applies into our own setting. So you are absolutely right.
Thank you very much. And as I said, don't forget to tell the stories of the back office of the stories of this paper, because I'm pretty sure you have interesting story to say. I feel really embarrassed to have to go because I don't like this going in and out, but the other option was not coming at all. So, and thank you for the chance. I'm gonna watch the recording, and if there is anything else, I will contact people individually.
Thank you for your introduction and your overview of the topic, and really helping us move forward to the dialogical format. I think for Natasha and myself, and the idea behind the network is really about learning on both sides, and I think there is potential to do that. I'm not going to repeat what Davide said, maybe just organizing things a bit different and giving some signposting to work of other colleagues which might be relevant. But yes, the overall distinction we are grappling with today is the distinction between uncertainty on the one hand, having a cognitive limitation and not having the tools to know, which often people talk about as this trap of modernity, where we aim to shed a light and collect information about everything, capture and understand. So take away uncertainty. On the other hand, we have ambiguity, where the question is about interpretations, right? And especially in African settings, I think it can be a very powerful concept, particularly looking at ambiguity as a strategic element, right? In African settings, that's my experience, they're inevitably permitted by dualities between the formal, the informal, colonial and post-colonial, African, non-African practices. So how do different situations interpret the inherent ambiguity? Are we doing this or are we doing that? In my experience, I work with farmers in rural Ghana, and there what we saw was this constant tension, right? Are we doing what our developmental project is about and doing agriculture as a business, or are we doing just relational work within our community? So I think it can be a powerful concept to explore. Another concept, as David said, it's mystery. And mystery, that's the absence of meaning, right? The unknown, and there is no way of knowing it. What we've talked before on previous calls was the work of our colleague José Bento da Silva, who apologizes for that. He was not able to join us today, and that's why David had to step in. But what he's looked at is the Jesuit exercises and how they shape understanding of God's will. So where it's a setting where mystery is in the core of the Jesuit institutional order. Other practices we can think about, magic or witchcraft, where we have a process, we do these steps, and then something we don't understand happens. So these are just some the conceptual space where we are. And as we said, we can think of these concepts and that notion of this agential power of the supernatural and meanings or the absence of meaning. We have somebody, PK, I'll mute you. So we can talk about these concepts in communities, very much using ideas from functionalist ideas, how they build cohesion, how they resolve tensions, as in the paper we'll be discussing today. We can think about them from a more institutional point of view. As I mentioned, José's work on the Jesuit order, where mystery and not knowing God's will, it's assumed to be at the core of the Jesuit order, right? They don't want to know, and because they assume there is no way of knowing, but they develop these exercises to interpret and understand God's will in certain situations. And another work I wanted to mention is a special issue of organization studies by our colleague Mariana Futaki, where they actually bring in these conversations in contemporary organizations, right? The post-secular spirituality and religion, which is to say that as much as we say, oh, rationality, spirituality has been erased of organizations and so forth, increasingly we have these contemporary notions of spirituality and religion, even things like mindfulness, which come into organizations, and often we can link them to discourses, narratives, symbols. So understanding these methods, these tools, I think links to make to enhance our learning, right? Rather than just partitioning spirituality or witchcraft or religion within Malawi, we can see how these conversations are widespread all over. These are some of the ideas that came to my mind. I have this figure just as a way to head over to Domenico and Carlo if they want to talk about their findings, say a few words about that scheme, or and maybe move on to their presentation. What I would note here is, in the darker part of the figure, we see mystery and ambiguity highlighted. And in the white part of the figure, there is the process through which tensions are resolved.
Yes, Mira, thanks. Well, first of all, allow me to say that it's a real pleasure to hear Davide Nicolini, because, of course, we've been reading a lot of his work also that contributed to this research. And, well, apologies for Rob that couldn't be here, but he sent his apologies and he would have loved to be here. Yeah, Domenico, would you like to walk us through the figure, and then I can add?
Okay, no, just very briefly. Thanks a lot for introducing our paper, both and the debate around it. I really appreciate, especially your reflections on the mystery and ambiguity and uncertainty part. That's something that we are not expert on. We were not expert on. Just to start revealing a little bit the back office part of the project. We knew that we wanted to do a paper that related to the community, to these Malawian communities where we happened to be as part of a broader project that I can tell you more later, or Carlo can tell you more later. But the part related to witchcraft was a complete surprise to us. So we knew that the paper was broadly something about communities, and we were sensing that there was some inequality that was preventing certain actions than people engaged in the project were expecting to happen. But witchcraft, as you can imagine, was a big taboo. And so, well, basically, long story short, we can tell you more about how we started sensing that we couldn't have done a research without engaging with that. But we arrived to a certain point where we understood that we couldn't write any research if we were not engaging with these bad events that were taking place over time in our data set. So basically, in almost all interviews that we've done in our ethnographies, we did quite a lot of walked-in interviews, walk-along interviews with people engaged in the community, and they were referring to these bad events happening, and they were never doing that in open spaces, where they were rarely doing that in open spaces when they could be heard from others. But often we were in a setting, and Carlo can describe it better, of course, because he was in the field, but we were reflecting on the phone very often that it was very important. I mean, basically the best conversations that were more salient about what was really happening around these bad events, why they happened, what could have been the cause of that was taking place, one-to-one, basically. So there was a spatial dimension about being heard by others in the community. And then different interpretations. So all what you see on the bottom, and now I'm keeping it short, and you can ask more questions later. Carlo can say more. Is fruit of interpretation that took place between Carlo, our field research assistant that played a very important role. I hope that we can talk about that at some point. And the individual respondents. I will pause it here unless you really want a complete explanation of the figure, but I don't know if that's part of the purpose that you're showing this. What do you think, Mira?
No, for me, it was just a way to introduce your work and to show the figure to people, because I think it's important to have at least some kind of summary of the essence of your findings. I cannot give control to yourself, John. Can you hand control to Carlo for his presentation? No?
I think I can share it already, Mira. My screen at least. Oh, all right.
I can move the slides for you.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thanks, Mira. Perhaps there's a nice bridge also from the figure before. I think you could see the bad events like very, very big as an initial framing of what we've been doing in the field. We had a lot of data, and you will see why very shortly, why we did collect so many data and which kind of methods we did use. But I think that from the bad events, in a way, we started to think, where does everything start, right? And what happens before that? And the mystery that surrounded these bad events, and like knowing that you cannot know, is what sparked so many things. Like imagine, like it was so difficult for us also to understand together with our research assistant. Is it jealousy? Is it witchcraft? Is it both? So I think that, and also for us as a researcher, I think that in a way we couldn't understand really what was happening, and we couldn't frame it as mystery in a way that a multiple of things were happening, helped us also to frame this figure that was basically the process by which we did terrorize sort of how these dairy farmers were dealing with the tensions and happenings in their communities. Well, this research, next slide, Mira, please. This research, it's very special to me, and I guess also to my co-authors, because, well, I was a master student at the time, so it was 2018, and Domenico was my direct supervisor, and Rob too. And that was an interesting project within a broader research program that was called OSMARE, and OSMARE stands for Organizational Structure for Smallholder Resilience. It was, perhaps Domenico, if you're interested, can tell more. It was a project that was investigating 13 business models across these different African countries, where climate-smart agriculture incentives were put into place. And the idea was like, how did these incentives were influencing smallholder resilience? Interestingly enough, I was selected to go in Malawi on a case in Malawi. A dairy cooperative was in this rural community not so far from the capital Lilongwe. And well, I would like to highlight just some things that I think they are fundamental, and they drove a bit the execution of the research project. First of all, the program was enjoying the collaboration with a local university, the Luana University. It's an agricultural institute, and Domenico, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had very strong collaborations with the head of the department of that university. And I was in the field, funny enough, with my other colleague, Rob, so my direct supervisor, let's say. And he was in another community, though. It was in a community a bit less rural, if you want, but he was still investigating dairy practices of farmers in another community. So we are factually at the same time in the field, in two different locations, supported by two master students that were two very bright students that were acting also as translator and were living with us in the community. I went in the field with a very with a very broad, let's say, with a very inductive approach. Like, I did know that we wanted to investigate how these dairy farmers were carrying out their practices within the dairy cooperative they were part of. So we did know that some climate smart agriculture, such as hydroponic fodder, were into the place in the community, but that was everything that we knew. Like, in our understanding, we wanted to understand how did formal and informal institution impacted the way these farmers were acting. This was the frame that we had. That doesn't imply that we didn't read enough on theory and we didn't do our literature work. Let's say we did read a lot on practice theory from Shatsky, then back from Giddens, Bourdieu, and everything that was somehow connected, all these social studies too. And it was very interesting because, of course, the first approach to practice theory as a master student also may be very crash test, allow me to say. But after a while, you read Shatsky, you start understanding a bit the interesting aspects of why people do what they do, because it makes sense to them. And if you disentangle a bit what they say and the material aspects of it, also what do they do while they say what they think, that kind of really disentangling the complexity of what they're doing, and it helps us a lot on to getting very much into the feet on the ground in the reality. So, said that, I think one key aspect before going to the field was the matrix that we co-created. Next slide. And this matrix, thanks, Mira. This slide highlights a bit also allow me the frustration and say, okay, the practice is okay. It's about doings, it's about sayings, but how do we make sure that we get information that helps us to understand, okay, what constitutes this practice? And we do know that it's a bundle of activities, right? It's about collecting fodder, it's about milking, it's about delivering the milk. It's constituted a series of practices that the dairy farmers in Malawi do, in this Chewa community do. And I think it's important also to highlight this. Well, we have several ways we collected information, such as participant observation, interviews, informal conversations, go-along interviews that I will tell you more in the next slides, focus group discussions, videos, pictures, and so on and so forth. These were basically the way we collected information on the practice, and why we did so is because we wanted to have enough different ways by which we recorded what was happening on the field. So on a specific practice, we wanted to know something talking about what they were doing, a video depicting what they were doing, perhaps another farmer describing what another farmer was doing while it was doing the practice. So we wanted to triangulate a lot our data, of course. And the daily reflection were also very important because, of course, I was living with the master student, and we had frequent interactions on what was happening on the field, and really much about what really surprised us, what was new, and I did have a field note with me all the time to capture these insights. So in the top part, there are these activities, and I think these were, of course, I couldn't know them beforehand, but as I went into the field, I started feeling this matrix, not very practically, but mentally, to understand, okay, these are the practices of the dairy farmers. We need to have this type of informations. Next slide, Mira, please. So this is the picture of me in the field. And as you can see here, I have my 3 tools. That is, of course, a sort of a GoPro that I was carrying out in my chest. And of course, I needed to ensure that people were comfortable with that and agreeing on that. So I was asking the participants whether I could record their practices. Then I had a recorder because sometimes the voice couldn't be heard properly. So I was holding my recorder and I had my note. What I was doing, I was going in the field, I put 2 columns also in my notes, in my notebook, and I was going along with the farmer. So this is the go along interviews, and I think was a very crucial aspect that determined many insights in our research, because of course sayings, very much sayings, how people talk with a neighbor, for instance, while they were walking in the village. This information I could never get these informations in a formal interview, in a formal setting. While sometimes a farmer that was saying, oh, you know, that person, oh, you know, but not even related to witchcraft per se, but was giving me really an insights on what they were thinking about, why they were, you know, planting the seeds, or any other activity that was referred to their practice. So this is a bit of next slide, Mira, what I was doing also in the field, because like there is a highlight also in the literature that you need to feel, in a way, if you feel what farmers do, you get also an idea and an insights on what your what the respondents is feeling while he's doing the practice. So I did really very much on a short to small scale became I don't know, acquainted with some practices of farming in loco, and it was very fun, first of all, and second of all, I think it helped also to get the trust across respondents. It was allow me to say, a fun activity to do together, because it's kind of unusual also to see that we were, you know, using the sickle in the waters of rivers of Malawi. And I remember still I was escaping from, I don't know, a snake that was like around, you know, like this was very interesting practice itself, doing the things with farmers. Next slides. And this is basically, I don't know, Mira, whether it's possible to, this is basically was my, you know, I was having a bike in the village, and I was visiting farmers around, and this one was the practice of carrying the milk from the farm to the cooperative, for instance, you see. And it was very interesting, because of course the trust of the community was also gained by hearing farmers that I didn't know, that I visited the day after, and they were saying, oh, I saw you in the bike the other day. And that practice was quite unusual, and in a way it gained trust. And I think trust, it was a fundamental value that allowed us to get into the space of trust, of security, that such a topic requires to be shared. So this just to say, these were some of our practices. And next slide, Mira. And I realize that I'm spending quite some time, so I will just be a bit faster. Yeah, these are just some images. We collected a lot of pictures, and these are, of course, the multitude of things that dairy farmers are doing in that village. And yeah, like doing the go along interviews, we were basically following them from taking the fodder to the end of the day. So this was what we collected in a way. And you can see there are some practices that are more related to their formal positioning within the dairy cooperative, such as the weighting the milk or checking for impurities, to the more informal that we highlighted, such as sharing the milk once they get back to the village, if the milk it's not it's rejected, or in other cases right after the milking process. Next slide. Yeah, so very briefly, what's new? I think I wouldn't linger too much on the findings itself, but what we did find, or we did try to address and depict, is a process. So a community entrepreneuring, such as dairy farmers being part of a community and being therefore part of the dairy cooperative as acting shareholders, right? So we are really talking about a community-based enterprise. So the process of carrying on their role through their practices revealed that in face of tensions and contradictions, collective and spiritual dimensions took a huge role into deal with these contradictions and these tensions, and in a way also to address mystery in a way. witchcraft in particular, and I will answer to Davide's questions. That was, it's witchcraft talk, one way of doing community. Well, for sure, it is one avenue that it does provide is an avenue, let's say, like, let's call it spiritual avenue, that it's accompanied by social material doings too. So also more rational ways of addressing the conflict and the issue at hand to sustain change. But it's not the only one. Of course, there are other forms of spirituality, such as even being a Christian in the community and the tensions that it may be formed of believing, or like also do know that witchcraft was present in the community, the tensions between the two. Also, it's a way in which tensions are dealt with. And this adds a layer, of course, of complexity that we discussed about it with the co-authors and with other scholars, that it was present also, like being a Christian and at the same time believing in witchcraft. That adds a layer of complexity that would have been a bit too, in our opinion, too complex to disentangle. But it's for sure another interesting point that we did find very relevant, like being a farmer, being a Christian, protecting their business, and dealing with these tensions. Next slide. Thank you, Mira. Yeah, so here I just want to share that well, practice theory was very useful, because there is an intertwined way by which farmers were dealing with the bad events, let's say, going a bit more into the conceptualization we did. There were very different things, and looking at practice theory, so like looking at what farmers were doing and what farmers were saying, gave us a lot of insights on how this rational and more, I wouldn't call it irrational, but more spiritual way interacted. So like it allowed us to take a kind of zoom out from what was happening and give a justification, or like give give us a better understanding of what was really happening in the field, and isolate a bit processes and practices. The local research assistant was essential. I will tell you an example. Like in many instances, he lived in the community. The research assistant. He was really appreciated by the community, respected very much by the community. He had a very strong charisma and leadership. And he was, in some instances, in the spaces of, while he was like, while farmers were in the position and in the trust to share information about witchcraft, that there must, the safe space was essential. He was critical into conversating with them, saying that he understood what they were saying, and he wouldn't treat them as like believing in supernatural, because most of the times people were also not sharing because of mistrusting also my judgment, or believing that they would judge them in a way. Okay, so I will be faster, Mira, because I know that I'm okay.
Yes, please. We want to engage with the rest of our audience.
You're right. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, this is basically embracing also what Davide was saying, right? Witchcraft, it's per se a Eurocentric term, like it's has been of course used in this paper, but we do acknowledge that its use, it's per se a Western bias perspective on the things we experience that perhaps could have been called in a different way. That's for sure. And of course, our findings resonates also with other African and European context too, very much. And well, to conclude, I think it's important to say, can this be replicated, or is it very relevant as a topic? Well, it is. I do work also personally now. I work as advisor at Wageningen, and my focus is on global South economies, and we do have this frame of organizing in an already organized, right? The frame of a dairy cooperative, you can imagine it's a very much Western model of how milk should be collected, how milk should be graded, and what is the business model behind it. Sometimes we don't realize how much instead it's happening during the process of dairy farming, that it's not per se how it has been implemented in the Western world. So in the development context, that is of course very important to see how things in reality are on the ground, where social norms are part of the daily of the everydayness of dairy farmers or farmers in broader terms. And I think that was the last slide, Mira. Am I correct? Yeah. Okay.
We have a bit more.
Yeah, this is the last slide, I think. Well, this is just to say, I do work with food systems, let's say, to understand in food system analysis. And of course, when we talk about dairy, we talk about food per se. And these spiritual dimensions often are not very much captured by the way we address food systems or trying to understand how do food systems work. And I shared just here a QR code if you're interested to scan it. Page of our lab, of a community. When I say our, it's a community of scholars, practitioners. They're trying to understand what are the best way to analyze and understand the food systems in their complexity, and in general systems in their complexity, and organization. How do organizations work within these complex systems? And this is the LinkedIn page that tries to organize events of this kind, allow me to create this network across scholars and practitioners to understand how do systems work. And I will stop here. Apologies if I went a bit over the time.
Domenico, do you have anything to add?
I just wrote a few notes on the chat. Perhaps the only thing to mention is that part of our struggles, we had many struggles during the development of this paper, but one of those was how to thank and acknowledge the research assistant that it was really partnering with Carlo in the field. They spent, I think, 6 weeks full time on the field, if I recall well, and the name is not mentioned, but at the same time we wanted to not reveal too many elements of his identity, knowing that the topic has some elements of taboo, perhaps to be discussed too. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlo, for giving us more a big picture of how you did your field work. I think it's important, and it's something we should be able to discuss, this process of entering communities, gaining trust, especially as an outsider, working with local partners as well. So I don't think that collaboration is essential in my experience as well to accessing these insights. I see in the chat that Maggie Chimbwanda, she's offering some understanding. Maybe Maggie, you could help us by explaining the links between entrepreneuring and witchcraft. I'm not sure, I can't see the exact comment. Is she there? Well, if Maggie can explain her comments in the chat, I think the person to turn to is our discussant, and this is Tankwande, who's a lecturer at Malawi University of Business and Applied Sciences. Are you online, Stan?
Yeah, yes, I'm here.
So we're passing over to you to give us your interpretation of the paper and the questions that it brought up to you.
Okay.
I can move the slides for you.
Okay, yeah, you can move it. Go to the next slide. Next one. Okay. First of all, thank you everyone for for hosting this, and Carlo and Dominica, for your fascinating paper. And I see, Carlo, you had a good time in Malawi, it seems. Anyway, thank you for that. So one of the first things which came up on the paper, of course, I have to state that I'm not really an expert in this field of spirituality or what have you, but the framing of witchcraft as spirituality. Because in my limited understanding of this concept of witchcraft, which is, you know, as you stated, is a common, you know, a common concept in our setting. But my limited understanding of it is of it being more of a tool, a social tool to control or to deal with others. It's not necessarily that one has maybe or uses certain powers to, I don't know, to punish someone, but it's a tool. And I think there was a fascinating line in your paper. I can't find it, but it's a tool which maybe someone or a group of people use in order to convince others that maybe someone else is nasty or what have you. So that was one of the first points that I'm not too sure if, you know, in the general meaning of spirituality, if witchcraft really fits into that. It's more of a social political tool. If you understand the point that I'm trying to raise. So that was one of the best points, or maybe, I don't know, questions that you could comment on, you know, why you. Yes.
Thank you, Stan. I mean, I think at that point we've already mentioned a few times, right?
Yes.
And maybe it's a way to talk a little bit to us more about your analysis and your logic in developing your insights. Is it spirituality? Is it guided by some kind of beliefs, values, or can we think about witchcraft and the way you encounter it as more of a discursive practice, a tool to really to do community politics, as David was also suggested? How did you arrive at calling it spirituality, spiritual practice?
I think that's a question to the writers, yeah?
Yes, I think that's the question.
Would you like us to respond right away, or should we?
Yeah, I think
Sorry. Carlo, would you like to go ahead, or?
Can the question be reframed? Apologies, Mira. It would help me a bit.
So it's this distinction. Are we talking about a spiritual practice when we talk about witchcraft, and what makes you call it a spiritual practice as opposed to a discursive practice, as opposed to you could have reached out to theories of power, politics, to understand how these tensions are negotiated?
Yeah, no, thanks. Well, it's inherently in witchcraft, at least in our framing, that power is expressed. Like it was used as a frame, for instance, as our discussant also highlights, of how others put the frame that not necessarily is on the person that may fear that a bad events may happen, but are others that may put the mystery and the eventuality that may happen in the head of the respondent. So it's that way in which power is exerted through, of course, the witchcraft framing that is not per se done by the respondent or the one that may fear, but by others. So there is also a way of that is what makes it communal and a part of the community too. that is basically is the village, is the neighbors. This in our understanding, in our framing, or how we address that, is the village and the community and the neighboring, perhaps that may suggest that there may be the eventuality that witchcraft may occur if you are a dairy farmer. So in that sense, power, it's part of this power dynamics are part of this framing. Maybe they want to have access to resources. Maybe they want to simply respect the Chewa tradition. And apologies if I'm really framing as a Western researcher. This is clear that the Chewa tradition, or at least some collective values that characterize, of course, many communities across the world. So this is kind of my short answer. But perhaps Domenico, also you want to add very briefly something, or?
I just wanted to add one aspect of this, which comes from exactly as Davide said, the fact that we were taking what we were learning from the field and then thinking about what we can learn in the West. So I happened to spent the first half of my life in Rome, really near the Vatican, and there, what we see also in these days, of course, is that spiritual talk has a double meaning when you engage, for example, with priests, with cardinals, and so on, or with people that are in their network. The first is really meant as spiritual, and the second is meant as a metaphor for power and politics. So basically, we're talking about, the will of God, and instead we're talking about the will of somebody, of some humans that are interpreting the message of God, and that's where part of the ambiguity is in. So I will pause it here to say that this is a little bit the mental exercise that we have done. We have in the transcripts that Carlo was bringing to us, there was this language of witchcraft, and then we read on the one hand books of anthropology which explain us, the meaning of witchcraft in itself in the Chewa tradition and in other traditions across Africa, but also across Europe and other parts of the world. And then on the other hand, how it could be used as a metaphor. So that this is part of the ambiguity where we didn't want to frame it in one way or another, but in fact, seeing how the ambiguity around this talk was part of the complexity of this case. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, I think to me what I understand is those accounts, explanations of bad events, they were inherently ambiguous.
Yes.
And that moves you to the different levels of your process model. Okay, Stan, I think it's your turn. Moving to the next slide.
Okay, so second comment or question is on inequality, because the way it's presented in the paper is like you have this Chewa community, very egalitarian, very equal. Suddenly, this milk cooperative comes in, and then traces of inequality start to arise, and from that, the jealousies and so on and so on. But in my understanding, a community like that one, it has a historic, a historic level of inequality, and this inequality is based on land. Access to land, the size of the land that you have, where your land is located, if it's maybe close to a water source. So there already was inequality even before, the arrival of this milk cooperative. And so the point I'm possibly trying to suggest is, if maybe you would have sort of like commented on that in the paper, that there has been historic inequality, and possibly try to uncover how, let's say, those who had better access to land, how they dealt with the inequality, and what can result from it, the jealousies and so on. So I don't know. That was a comment that I'm putting here. Maybe you could also comment on that. I don't know.
Yeah, thanks. That's a very interesting comment, and it's very interesting because once we did this process framework, let's say, what I think was critical in our discussions, Domenico, correct me if I'm wrong, is also like how much we can hark back also to when the community was founded, this dairy community, this dairy cooperative was founded, because of course, once we want to have a processual understanding of things, it's very relevant also to see when everything entered in the community. We did rely a lot on the documents, historical documents of the cooperative. We didn't, although its relevance, addressed this land inequality, but I do see your point, and I find it very, very relevant, very, very relevant. Yes, especially like, how land also is like, is inherited. We did know that also that changes, right? Like whether, which ethnic group you are from. So those are all aspects that we didn't consider, but I did find very, very important that you mentioned them. Yeah.
Just wanted to add two aspects that are interrelated here. One was related to fodder. So one thing that that was very important is the search for fodder. Fodder is basically the feed of the cows. And so first of all, the cow in the current times, without going back in history, is an element of creating inequality, because only few people owns a cow. And so the people that do not belong, and basically owning a cow means providing milk to the family on a daily basis, which of course is related to fodder. And fodder is important because if you have your own field, you can get the fodder from your own field, or otherwise you need to get your cow to roam around, which is challenging. So and many of the bad events, not all, but Carlo, if I recall, a few at least, were related to eating something that was not supposed to be eaten, and so the cow had problems related to the fodder. Is that true? So
yeah.
So this is just to say that there are elements which bring us close to the elements of land. What we know also about that specific community is that in the past, and Carlo, again, correct me if I'm wrong, it was mostly cultivated at tobacco. And the topic of witchcraft, from what we read in anthropology books, was mostly related to the idea of owning land and having employed labor. So there is this language that we read in some anthropology books about, referring to employed labor as zombies. People that at the end of their day so tired they look like zombies. And so the person that owns the land being a witch, because basically create zombies. We are not expert in any of these things, but we read clearly a market that influenced a little bit our thought about how some of this history influenced the current practices. I'll pause here because these are my fragmented memories about what we read and studied. And if there is someone that is more expert on that, should refer to these things more than us. But thank you for the question.
Thank you, Stan. Shall we move on to the next
Yes,
question?
yes. So the next, maybe this is more of a direct question. So the next point was my reading of your paper. Essentially, you are trying to look at how a community cooperative legitimizes itself, how it tries to develop legitimacy within the setting that it operates in. And if you take it from there, from the community level to the broader level, you would find that, most of the literature would say that most of the formal legal rational organizations in Africa are also generally perceived to be illegitimate. They're alien. So in the process, they also need to continually deepen or develop their legitimacy. So the question I have is, what do you think, what can we take from what you have studied about this, small cooperative, how it is trying to develop its legitimacy? What can bigger formal organizations learn from this, from this study? in terms of, developing their legitimacy, in the broader African setting. Thank you.
Yeah, on the, I mean, as a quick answer, I would say that the way they are building legitimacy is through some practices that we've been highlighting in the paper. So the way I would say that this dairy cooperative function and their members function is by indeed including some of these, what we framed as spiritual practices. That is how legitimacy building also works in this specific community. And it's not being, being legitimate as a dairy farmer, being part of that specific community and needed to answer to different needs. So being legitimate is true. Like, I think that the witchcraft practice is also help in a way to build this legitimacy, where I know that it may sound counterintuitive, but that's exactly part of all the story. Like, if you're a farmer, then it is very likely that you put like, for instance, a spiritual protection on the coral. Okay. So like, this is how you build your kind of position as a dairy farmer in that specific community. And allow me to say that also it was very interesting to see how dairy farming itself in Malawi, and perhaps the discussant can really help me also on this, has been introduced like in the mid-50s, I think. And before, there was no protection for the coral. Like, there was no, there may be coral, but not applied to the dairy practices. So it's also interesting to see how actually this interaction of witchcraft being a spiritual practice can be, it adapted also to the newly introduced organization. And this intertwined practice is what built legitimacy. But Domenico, perhaps you want to add something, or?
Not much on this question. This is a little bit beyond what we try to figure it out for this paper. I think, don't know if it's related to this question, but I mean, what seems fascinating and a little bit disturbing to me is how Western projects like the one we were embedded in, and of course not just projects but programs and policies, tend to engage with these generic legal rational organizations, as you referred them, Stan, believing that by engaging with these organizations, they are really working from the bottom up, while in fact, as you are mentioning, they are aliens, and the community is actually trying to cope with them, trying to reap some benefits from it, but at the same time, dealing with them as alien bodies. So that's something that I found it fascinating, but perhaps beyond your question.
Thank you both. I would link this back to Davide's comments as well about the different ethical orders as well, right? So we have these different organizational forms, the more indigenous ones, the more important ones, which correspond with different maybe capitalist ethics, maybe I don't know, indigenous spirituality, witchcraft, magic, however you want to frame it. So I think that conversation is potentially meaningful and fruitful for us to follow. Let's move on to one of Stan's final comments.
Yes. So a final comment or observation. Sorry, the write-up was a bit long, but if you go into development literature, political science, there's always talk about, maybe Africans having a dependency mentality syndrome, and that dependency mentality, one of the ways that it displays itself is there's an acceptance of the big man, that's someone who advances materially, financially. There is an acceptance, even a praising of that person, so long as, or because at the end of the day, they expect that that person will, will hand down some, some of his, wealth or what have you. He will trickle it down to, the people at the bottom. That's where the dependency mentality comes in. But from reading your paper, because the way I viewed it is like the members of the mill group are like the local big men. They're, they're the ones who are advancing materially, financially. And from political science thinking, you would think that the rest of the community, they would applaud them. They would applaud them with the expectation that as they get materially richer and richer, they will, trickle down somewhat of it. But your study finds the opposite, that the rest of the community sort of like, is looking down upon them, is jealous of them. So I just wanted to ask, how do you think your findings deal with that broader logic in political science and development literature about the big man, the dependency syndrome? How can you relate your findings with that finding for political science?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I think this aspect was mentioned. I think also from the research, like from the research assistant, was a debate, was very much a topic during the fieldwork, because of course, I mean, now we are generalizing. Of course, there were also dairy farmers that were kind of subsistence. They were more wealthy and less, but overall in the village, you could see that they were the wealthiest. How does that relate to the discourses in political science? I will leave it to Domenico if you can add anything on that. But yeah.
So I'm not familiar exactly with this debate, but the question in general, the point here speaks to me quite a lot. So there are two forces at play, and I mean, again, we are referring about this empirical case, but we could take a similar example in rural Italy or many other rural areas around Europe, for example, and finding similarities, which is, on the one hand, there is this syndrome, as you call it, a big man syndrome. So basically, there is the person that is seen as more successful and accumulating resources compared to others that is looked up, taken as a point of reference, and so on. And on the other hand, as part of this interdependency, there is this person that, since is embedded within that community, physically, spatially, it's dependent on the others. So displaying richness, showing accumulation, and so on, make him or her vulnerable to others in the community. So it's I don't know if I see contradictions here. What I see is deep interdependency, especially when people are spatially embedded with each other. Or maybe I'm missing the deeper debate in political sciences. Stan, if you want to comment further, because maybe we're missing the point.
No. I mean, the way you're answering it, that was also my sort of like my immediate interpretation of your finding, that maybe what political science is saying, that, that the big man syndrome, that people can accept a big man who is distant. Someone whom, as you are saying, they don't live with, is not directly in their village. If that person is advancing, they can accept it. Of course, so long as that person trickles down some of his, what have you, to the people. But if that person is in the village, the immediate neighbor, like maybe the case that is happening here, they now become jealous. Now it's a different story, That was also my immediate interpretation of it, as you were saying, that if it's someone who's distant, that they don't directly relate to, they didn't grow up with, they don't personally know him, they can accept it, so long as he spreads some of his whatever. But if it's someone that personally know, it becomes a bit, personal. Now maybe that's where the jealousies come in. But that was also how I saw it as you are explaining it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Carlo and Domenico. And I'm very conscious we've missed our time to involve our audience and our listeners. So just quickly move on to our reflection point, and I would very much like to hear from the audience. I see some interesting comments on the chat. What have we learned today? What can we take away from today? Can we link it to our previous conversation? And I'll reach out to Ralph there, because in April we spoke about inequalities in Kenya among pastoralist communities and how these inequalities were also resisted, potentially weakening the safety net.
Sorry, are you inviting a quick input from me, Mira?
Yes, I'm inviting
So
any reflections from the audience, because we're almost out of time.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm going to be very short to basically just emphasize how fascinating the connection is between the two articles. I mean, I think Domenico knows I did have a look at this particular article that we talked about today quite a long time ago, and today was wonderful to really dive into it in more detail. So I really appreciate the possibility. And Davide's comments were really amazing, and the comments from the discussant and from the chat. I mean, one thing really that's come through also, Davide put this on the table, and I think our discussant did really great job to reiterate this and to clarify, elaborate this. Is, when do we talk about witchcraft, and perhaps when, what other words might we use? So, I mean, our time is up, but at some point it would be great to hear a bit more about how it was, when was it decided to use that framing? Was there some discussion in the author team? So, I mean, that might be quite a nice thing to discuss at another time. And I also really appreciate Reginald's point in the chat, to also kind of consider some of in some senses, the positive affordances of the spirituality. Although I think the paper does do that, right, to some extent. It talks about the way that, the entrepreneurship was kept on track, kept going through some of those things. So, I mean, apart from that, let me just leave it at that. Thanks, Mia.
Thank you. Reginald, would you like to share with us?
Yes, thank you. And I would want to say, please, I hope you can hear me quickly. I would want to say that's a very insightful work that you've done. Congrats to you for your deep understanding of the context and the African context, particularly when you are romancing with issues of spirituality. It goes very deep to touch on certain factors that explain our daily lives and the things that underpin even entrepreneurial mindsets. And I don't think we have a lot of time, but you touch on that. But the positionality is very important, because spirituality in African context emerges strongly, not only as forms of tensions, but there's a need to highlight it also as a form of strength and resilience, particularly for entrepreneurial businesses that operate in such challenging business environments. So thank you once again for your insightful paper.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can we have any more comments? Any more? What are you going to do next? Or did you find any exciting ideas for future research? Natasha?
Mira, I'm just very mindful of time, but Grace also shared a very complimentary note in the chat. The only reflection I can have is it's already been made. I think Ralph made a very good point about the lessons we're taking from these webinars, and we can have a separate webinar just reflecting on those things. A point that I picked up, and thank you very much to, I think Carla or Dominica clarified that. I was looking for that local author's voice to come in, and thank you for clarifying why the anonymity around that. I think the point that is made is just when we have these conversations to invite contextually based authors to be part of the theorizing and thinking through, to Grace's point as well, the sense making of the people on the ground. They may use a term, but really understanding what they mean behind that is so critical. So I would leave it at that, Mira. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can move towards our final points.
I think then, yeah, I'm going to steal 1 minute from everybody just to close. Firstly, again, for Davida for stepping in. We did hijack him from another meeting just to give the introduction, but unfortunately also opened with such a fascinating perspective that we need to take further. Stan, as our discussant, again, thank you so much for the preparation and sharing your insights. And then specifically also the attendees, thank you for all the comments that's coming through in the chat. And most importantly to our author that is unnamed, as well as Carlo and Dominica being part of this. Thank you for your conversation. We look forward to you joining the network now. And then just to remind you again about the network, please visit the website. All the information is on there, but become part of the conversation. Mira, I think we can move forward to the next slide, please. And then just to remind you, we've had quite a bit of progress, but we're looking forward now to our next webinar in June, which Stephanie Decker is going to share with us a paper on that side. I do want to appeal, we are looking for discussant and specifically researchers based in Ghana and Nigeria. So if you know of somebody in that space, please just get in touch with Mira or myself. We will be at AOM at the end of July, where there will be a PDW around the work that we're doing. We are in the process of finalizing arrangements for our next in-person workshop, which will be at the FM in Casablanca, Morocco in January. So keep an eye out for announcements on that, and that specific meeting will be in Rabat. I think that's everything. Mira, do we have another slide?
No, I don't think we have any more slides. I just wanted to say a couple of words about our next meeting on the 10th of June. We'll have Stephanie Decker come and she'll talk to us about a paper which is quite a few years old now, from 2014. But I think it's interesting to invite your thoughts on the role of buildings and architecture in Africa, especially modernist architecture in West Africa, in shaping mnemonic communities, memories, and how people interact. So she will talk to us about her work in Ghana and Nigeria, but also her work in historic ethnography, archival ethnography. So she's really has experience studying archives of big multinational companies, especially British companies operating in West Africa. And I think it can be methodologically an interesting space to explore what could we do using these methods, but also empirically, what are ways to understand the built environments that we encounter across Africa? What I picked is all these memes online, the Africa you won't see on TV. If that kind of visual, if these ideas resonate with you, please join us for our next webinar, where Stephanie will talk to us about conceptual ways of understanding organizational spaces in West Africa. thank you very much for joining us. And as Natasha said, we'll have a meeting in Copenhagen, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person in Morocco early next year. So thanks a lot for joining and attending.
Thanks very much.